But the amazing thing is that of all the holidays, the last holiday to be batal is Purim. It's the last holiday to be canceled out. It means that the light of Purim is the last light that we get to before going to realms we have no concept of what they actually are. Which means that Purim actually corresponds, because Shabbos corresponds to the seventh millennium, from 6,000 to 7,000, which corresponds to the sphere of Malchus. And Yom Kippur corresponds from 7,000 to 8,000. This Yom Kippurim. So Purim comes after. Purim actually corresponds to 8,000 to 9,000 in the world to come. That's the light of Purim, which corresponds to the sphere of Chachma. Oh, that's everything. Kabbalah is called Chachma Emes. It's called Chachma. Why is it called Chachma? So that brings you really to the whole point of why Kabbalah is everything. The biggest problem, if you can call it that, it's all part of the divine plan. God intended for this. The biggest problem of creation is a philosophical dilemma that has been dealt with by almost every major philosopher for thousands of years who believe in God and want to understand. Because the reality of God is that he's infinite. He's completely infinite beyond, we don't understand what it means to be infinite because there's nothing in our lives that we know is infinite that we can experience. Everything we can talk about something being infinite lines going in, two directions infinitely. We can talk about it on a theoretical level, the idea of infinite, but we cannot experience the infinite, not in the full sense of the term. If we could, and this is really, by the way, what God says to Moshe Rabbeinu in this week's parsha. Moshe, after he finally pleads on behalf of the Jewish people that God should not destroy them, and he realizes it's an Eis Ratzon, it's a time when God's granting, he's in a good mood, so to speak. Your father's in a good mood. Now's the time to ask for things. So he says to God, show me your glory. What he means by that is show me what you look like. Show me the light that represents you on a high level, way up at the top, as high as I could possibly go. And God says to him, not possible. If I showed you that light, you would die. Now, maybe you don't care about that. You're prepared to go, right? But the reality is I still need you. I made you for this purpose. You're designated to lead the Jewish people in the desert and give them the Torah. So I want you to remain alive. So therefore, I can only give you a small sampling. So there's all the different descriptions that the Torah itself uses, all the imagery that the Torah portrays. God passes, he puts Moshe in the cleft of a rock, and he passes by, and he covers it up so Moshe can't see the face, and he only sees the back of the head, which the Gemara says means the tefillin nut in the back of God's head, so to speak, whatever that means, right? It's all Kabbalah. By the way, we know what these things mean. Kabbalah explains that. It talks about what those things mean and how they fit into life. And then as God's passing by, he says the 13 traits of Rachamim, Hashem Racham B'Chanun, and Moshe is taught to say this is part of the tefillah, and that's the experience, and that's as far as it goes. But what is going on in the end? So, he's learning Kabbalah. That's what he's doing. For us, on a simple level, on a Peshat level, so it's portrayed in terms that we can relate to. So we have a story. It's like eating from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. Eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What's that all about? What's going on? So the world grapples with it, right? Other religions portray Adam and Chava like two children walking around, the garden without any clothing on. Little kids don't care if they're wearing clothing, so they also wearing clothing, and they weren't embarrassed, they weren't ashamed. They were pure and simple in those days, and they were talking to God, and God says, very specific terms, "Do not eat from the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, for on the day that you eat, you shall surely die." Now, what's complicated about that? If someone were to tell you that very thing, wouldn't you stay away from it? Someone says, don't eat this food. And if you eat this food, you're going to die. You're going to test it? You want to see if they're telling the truth? Yeah, I don't think so. We've been told, Sometimes people do silly things, and take unnecessary risks in life. But God was very explicit. He was very clear. So, and then after that, the eat, and it says, oh, now man knows between good and evil. And therefore I shall banish him from the garden and keep him from the Eitz Chayim, the tree of life, lest he live forever and become like one of us. But I always thought that knowing the difference between good and evil was the whole point of life. And how could they make this mistake in the first place on such a high level? So the story is very short. It's amazing how short the story actually is, but the Leshem has about 10, 15 chapters on the Chet Ezedas Tovara, and goes into a lot of detail and how the Sitra Achra went into the snake, what the snake actually was, what's going on a Kabbalistic level, what Adam Rishon was trying to achieve with it Kabbalistically. It's all Kabbalah. It's all Kabbalah. The most important story, probably in the entire history of mankind, the story of Adam Rishon and his mistake. I mean, for 130 years, he's doing tshuva, the Gemara says. After he's banished from the Garden of Eden, for 130 years, he's doing tshuva. He's fasting and doing other stuff the Gemara talks about, and the result is this, and the result is that, for 130 years. Why 130 years? Oh, because 130 is the product of 26 times 5. Okay, but what's the 26 and what's the 5? Well, there's 10 spheres. And when Adam did his chet, he damaged 5 spheres. And each sphere corresponds to a name of Hashem, which has a gematria of 26. So 5 times 26 is 130. Adam's doing tikkun on the highest level known to mankind. But unfortunately, since he dropped down spiritually after his sin, he could not go back up to the level where the sin was done, and therefore his tikkun was only partial. But the rest of history, all about the same tikkun. So what happens, right? These souls that he created from his go, they reincarnate in the generation of the flood, Migdal Bavel, right? And they end up in Egypt eventually. This is a Kabbalistic story. This is the Gemara. The Gemara talks about it a little bit, but this is in Kabbalah. Kabbalah is explaining the most important story known to mankind. We're going through history to rectify his sin. What he failed to do on that 6th day of creation, we're trying to accomplish over the course of 6,000 years of history. How can you fix anything if you don't know what's broken or how to fix it? How? How are you going to do it? That's what Kabbalah explains. That's what Kabbalah explains. It tells you, it's like going to school to learn how to become a mechanic, right? Or to become a doctor, right? You can't just be a doctor. I mean, listen, you can put a bandage on a person, you can stop the bleeding and maybe prescribe aspirins. Someone's got a headache, but the really complicated stuff. Who wants to open up a person and start looking at the insides of them, and know what to do once you're in there and not kill the person at the same time? They tried. Many people experimented along the way and it didn't work until we learned, and it became the medical profession at some point in time. Drugs too, but you have to learn how to do it. You have to learn, how the body works and what it reacts to. You have to understand the chemicals, and we're still making mistakes. The pharmaceutical companies, terrible mistakes. People die from many prescriptions. After a couple of years, they find out the truth. They tried. Sometimes it might be a little corruption involved, but it's all based upon research and science and knowing how things work at the deepest and most profound levels. Otherwise, you can't get involved. We don't take care of our bodies the way we're supposed to because we don't know biology. We don't take the time to understand how what we eat affects us. So they try to instruct us a bit, and you have the dietitians and people telling you this and telling you that. But overall, society as a whole, amaratzi, when it comes to digestion, when it comes to food products and things like that. Just take a look at, you walk at a store, how much junk is available and how much of it is eaten on a regular basis. So over time, we started introducing things like gourmet food and healthier food and, there's specific diets. But for the most part, people don't really move into that realm of eating until they've had a problem and they have no choice anymore but to actually eat that way. But again, it all depends on what you know and how the system works. So the biggest problem we have is that is that God's light is infinite. It's infinite. And because it's infinite, it's beyond anything that we can possibly relate to. But you're dealing with the fundamental problem. And that is, how do you create something finite from something infinite? That's the whole issue. The whole issue of creation, the whole issue of life is that one sticking point. That's all it is, just that one point. God is infinite, whatever that means, or Ein Sof, really be beyond that, because even though Ein Sof itself is a creation, which is the infinite light of God, comes from something called Atzmus, and you have to somehow get it to a point where people can exist, and not just exist, but exist with a certain level of independence that allows them to recognize the existence of something else outside of them, really inside of us, because God's inside of us too. Our souls and everything, God's in everything. But to keep it simple, it's like God's outside of us. And for me to be able to sit here and talk to you, and for you to hear what I'm saying, for me to recognize you and recognize me, right? It's like it seems simple in a world that's completely finite. But coming from a world that's infinite, it's impossible. That basically is the miracle of life, which has made many people consider the possibility that we don't even really exist. That maybe all of this is just a figment of God's imagination, which is real, which is fine, it's his imagination. But we live with this reality that we exist. But how? Because how is it possible? But the truth is, even that doesn't really work, because even if that were the case, still, the very fact that we would be a thought in God's mind, which we are, anyhow, even if we're real, requires a certain amount of independence. And God somehow created that. So he did that with a concept called Tzimtzum. As Kabbalah explains, one of the most important concepts, we live with constriction. We live with the reality that there's a left and there's a right, there's an up and there's a down, there's male and there's female, there's good and there's evil, and there's light and dark. We live with that. But that was only a creation that God made as a result of a concept called Tzimtzum, where he took his infinite light, constricted it at a particular point in the shape of a sphere, created a cavity within the light of this infinite light that allowed for the existence of finite things inside. But that transition is beyond understanding. We can say the words, I can tell it to you, I can explain to you what he did, but do I understand it? No, because it's beyond human comprehension. That's okay. I don't understand free will either, but that doesn't stop me from making free will choices every single day. I don't understand so much about how this world works, but it doesn't mean it can't function within it. Yeah, the scientific world works the same way too. They're still trying to figure out exactly what is energy. We use the term all the time. Energy is this, and we use energy for that. And you have to save energy and all that. But the reality is, no one really, in the physical realm who looks for the answer in the physical realm understands exactly what energy is, but we do know how it works. We know how to manipulate it and how to use it to our advantage. So the fact that we don't understand energy, and we do, Kabbalah does, we know exactly what it is. In fact, every time a Jew says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, they're basically giving over the formula of energy, because we're saying that God himself is the force of all forces, which means he's the source of all energy. But if you don't believe in God, and you're not looking for the answer in the spiritual realm, only the physical realm, you're not going to see it, because the answer's on the other side. Even Niels Bohr pointed out in his time, back in 1905, where he said, you know something, folks? As smart as we are, I'm paraphrasing, right? As smart as we are, there's a curtain there. He was trying to say that there are concepts in our reality, if you trace them back far enough, you get to a wall. You're not gonna be able to understand what they are. Until that wall, you can understand a lot. And you can get to that, you can get to the, to accomplish a lot with it. But because why? Because the essence is spiritual. But if you accept the spiritual world and you understand that God is the force of all forces, then you have your answer. You know exactly what it is. But what is God? Okay, that's okay. That's a good place to stop. That's a question that we're not going to really be able to answer in any real concrete terms until the world to come.